like to just very briefly introduce the last keynote speaker of today. We have Professor Geddes, who is a professor at the Department of Public Policy and Management at Cornell University and a core faculty member of the Cornell Institute for Public Affairs. He is a founding director of Cornell Program in Infrastructure Policy and a visiting scholar at the American Enterprise Institute. His research focuses on policies toward funding and financing of major infrastructure projects in the transportation and water sectors. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marta. Thank you very much. Hopefully you can hear me. Thank you for the kind invitation. But I do have to say many thanks to everybody. So Dario, Radu, Steve, all these folks who worked so hard to bring this conference together. It's been terrific. It's been a home run, grand slam, whatever sports analogy you want to use. It's been great for me as a social scientist to just be invited and to be involved in all the amazing developments, the engineering developments, a lot of physics, et cetera. Thinking about this and particularly seeing the young people at SpaceX and the pod teams has somewhat restored my hopes for the future. And I think it's been great. So I want to talk about, maybe you think it's an important topic, where's the money going to come from? How are we going to pay for all this? One thing, I'm trained as an economist to think of how much a thing's going to cost, and then are the benefits going to be worth the cost? Right, so the numbers kind of run in your head. So my talk is on funding and financing models for the Hyperloop. So one of the things, though, that's concerned me over the past couple of days is I haven't heard a rigorous definition that I think would fly with financiers of what the Hyperloop is. Okay, so I think you're possibly going to get into a meeting, whether it's a hedge fund, a mutual fund, a private equity fund, and maybe venture capital that would like to invest, and they're going to ask you a 4-word question after you shake hands. What is the Hyperloop? Okay, so based on some conversations, by the way, this is the CPIP program that Marta mentioned, and we work closely with HARP. I'm a HARP founding board member, so HARP and CPIP share a lot of common goals. I urge you to take a look at our website. Just Google CPIP Cornell or CPIP, CPIP Cornell. That'll get you there. So based on some conversations with our HARP industry folks, let me suggest 3 things that I've distilled. It's a constrained environment, okay? It's different from a 747 flying up in the sky that's basically in an unconstrained environment. The pilot can go wherever he or she wants. There's low pressure within that environment. It's not clear to me whether the tube is perfectly round or oval, if that's still in play. Okay, I'm a social scientist, so I'm kind of a bystander. I think I've gathered that you're all talking about low pressure in there. How low? Still up for grabs. And we're talking about high speed, okay? But one of the things that has to be done before anybody gets in a room with a banker, with a big fund, whatever, is we have to stand shoulder to shoulder, no daylight. Exactly what is the Hyperloop? It's bang, bang, bang. It's this. And everybody agrees. We're not arguing about it. That's what they're looking for, okay? And you're not going to get your money. They're risk averse. And this is a big new technology. So whether you agree with this or not, let's talk about that and get that resolved. Sorry, I had to start on a negative note, but let me get more positive. I have studied infrastructure for almost 15 years now, and this is the construction, heavy constructions, roads, bridges, tunnels, seaports, airports, drinking water systems, wastewater systems, energy systems, okay? And it's been bedeviled by problems with vocabulary. So one of my personal missions is to try to clean that up and make sure the Hyperloop is not bedeviled by the same confusion. The funding of Hyperloop infrastructure is not the same as its financing, okay? These are 2 distinct concepts. I'm going to make a pitch right now that the funding is the key. The funding is the key, and if you have a good funding model, story in place, the financing will follow, particularly in a country like the United States or Europe, where financial markets are well developed, okay? Let me be clear about the distinction. Hyperloop funding refers to the underlying dollars or euros, the resources that you need to pay for the infrastructure. Where is the money going to come from? Okay? And basically, and this is money for what? 4 items, obvious: design, construction, operation, and maintenance. Maybe you can think of subgroups of those, but those are the buckets that the infrastructure policy world, thinks about. I want you to go, your brain to go to only two categories of funding. Some type of fee correlated to use of the Hyperloop. I'm going to argue that I want you to get away from the word fee to a price. It's just like buying a 6-pack of beer is a user fee. Buying a dozen eggs is a user fee. You eat the eggs, right? Or, and we can discuss this, some type of broader, dedicated tax source that's not correlated to use. That's not a user fee, okay? Either kind of a user fee or not a user fee. In my world, this is called an availability payments PPP, a particular type of way where if you don't have a toll on a road, but you still want to bring in the private sector, you dedicate tax money to it. It's called availability payments. I won't spend much time on that because that's, specific. Now, normally as an economist, I describe, the way we think the world is, and I don't get proscriptive, right? I don't make a pitch for stuff. Today, I'm going to deviate from that. And this is a wonderful thing because as I was thinking about this, this is new technology. The engineering that you guys are doing is all new, but we have the opportunity to set the vocabulary for the Hyperloop. What is the word called that you charge for? A whole bunch of policy terms can be combined, and that's really cool. So I'm going to argue that the best approach for funding the Hyperloop is a system-wide, I'll talk about the system in a minute, real-time variable, meaning a price that per unit that varies in real time. Like I lived in Chicago for 6.5 years, number 10 wheat. They trade commodities, and the commodities are very precisely defined. Number 10 wheat is number 10 wheat is number 10 wheat. Doesn't matter which farmer it comes from. Trades in real time in both a spot and a forward market, and the commodity markets in Chicago, okay? I would like us to avoid the words toll, fee, or rate, because that gives the impression that it's flat, okay, and unchanging. Economists hate that, right? I would like us all to use the word price from the beginning, because everybody's familiar with a price. You go to the movie, there's a price for the movie, right? This gives you the Hyperloop's funding model. And it's very familiar to a lot of people. I do not know, and I bet no one on earth knows, what is the right per unit, right? Is it per minute? Is it per kilometer? Is it per trip within the Hyperloop? This is something this is a really fun dinner discussion. This is something we really need to figure out. But that's what I would like us to think about. What is the unit when we charge per unit? Now, this is a very familiar funding model to anybody in my world. Very successful. Are utilities perfect? No. But very successful for funding the electricity that's powering this room per kilowatt hour. Heated on your house per therm of natural gas. In my house, we pay per gallon of water. You pay per minute of cell phone use, right? Very, very familiar utility model, successful funding streams without a ton of subsidies typically for all this basic, really important stuff. Okay, now let's return to your Econ 101 course. Sorry about this, but I have to do it. The price paid for the use of the Hyperloop to an economist trained in my tradition, which is neoclassical economics in the 1990s at the University of Chicago in the golden era of Chicago economics, it's clear to me that the price reflects value, benefit, or willingness to pay to the customer, okay? Let's avoid the word user. I hate that about highways. I love state DOT people, but they talk about users, and I'm like, yeah. They're not users, they're your customers. Be nice to them. They're the people that inevitably should be paying for the infrastructure, right? Typically, companies don't talk about users, they talk about their customers. Let's borrow from that. Now, this value is read off the demand curve for the Hyperloop. Why is that important? Because it instantly gives you your revenue, okay? I have to do this. Suppose this is throughput through the tube. So this is the, however we're defining it, number of pods that go through the tube per unit of time. Let's say it's per week. Pick up unit of time. So suppose this is number of trips, pods, whatever. This is throughput, okay? This is price, right? And so this thing is the demand curve for the Hyperloop. That is your most key thing. Now let me say, if I can wax philosophic for a moment, I've seen a lot of shapes over the past couple of days, a lot of engineering designs and lines. Let me submit that this rectangle is the most important shape of the past 3 days. That's a dollar number. That's your revenue per week for the Hyperloop. Why is it revenue? It's the price per ride, per pod, per unit, times the number of units that go through the Hyperloop. If you don't have that, game over. Congress ain't going to give you the money. States are tapped out. Cities are tapped out. If you don't have that orange rectangle, we're toast. Sorry, but that's true. Okay? So think about the demand curve, the willingness to pay, the value customers place on the use of this system that we're talking about here. Quickly to financing. Once funding is in place, once you have that orange rectangle and you kind of know where that demand curve sits in the mind of an economist. It's not in you don't see a demand curve. You impute where the demand curve is by people's behavior, what they're willing to pay and how many rides you get at that price. Once funding is in place for the Hyperloop, we are blessed, if I may use that appellation, to live in a place where financial markets are so developed that the financing will come to fund the giant cost of design and construction, okay? As I walk around, I say, man, the cost of, the right-of-way, the design, the tunneling, the construction, all this stuff, this is a big dinner bill, right? Where are you gonna come from? This is called the capital cost in my world, right? And you have to have that funding story in place first before you can even get in the lobby of the bank, okay? Where do we get the financing from? Well, just in the United States, it varies by country. Main one is tax-exempt municipal debt. It's a multi-trillion-dollar market on Wall Street. Tax-exempt means the holder of the bonds does not pay interest at the federal, or taxes at the federal level on the principal or interest, on the interest payments. Sorry, hard to get that out. Privately issued corporate bonds are taxable, but there's a privately issued non-taxable version called private activity bonds or PABs. That's an option. TIFIA, we talked about with Mr. Berthet. He was also talking about RIF loans. State revolving funds fund a lot of finance, a lot of water projects. The most interesting one for us on the finance side is an equity piece. Where you have equity investors that want to take the risk, okay? So Al, you were talking about, you did a great job of pointing out some of the risks, right, associated with this. And I agree entirely, right? And so a lot of this is about managing those formidable risks with a giant new transportation technology like this, right? But it turns out there's some classes of investors that seek that risk. They go after that risk. Why? They don't love us because they're winners, because they think they're looking for a high expected return. And you can think about who they might be. Is that an insurance company? No, probably not. Pension fund? University endowment? No. It's like a venture capital, right? Maybe private equity, hedge funds, people who want the risk. And until the project is de-risked, meaning you know what the revenue and the costs are going to look like, you know what the net cash flows are, then you can bring in institutional guys. So the nature of the investors changes over the life cycle of the project. Once you have the net cash flow system up and running, then you can get insurance companies, private pension funds, public pension funds, giant sovereign wealth funds, giant pools of capital. You can't believe how much money is sloshing around the globe looking for a home, right? And they would love stable, predictable net cash flows from the Hyperloop. But you got to de-risk the project first by seeing how all this stuff pans out, right? Then these guys want to offload. The hedge funds want to offload, VC want to offload. They just want that upfront bang, and then they want to turn it over to a more risk-averse investor. Anyway, you can tell I'm excited about that form of investment, as are a lot of other people. We can talk about it's done through this vehicle. I wrote a book on this called PPP, or Public-Private Partnership. Okay. Key thing about the Hyperloop that I'm comfortable in making this prediction. We don't have to start from square one. We can look at the history of other industries in the developed world and how they evolved, okay? So you have railroads, you have trucking, you have airlines, you have communication systems, a whole bunch of systems where we consider those to be network industries. You know, economists are kind of like weather people. We make predictions. What's the weather going to be? I'm making a prediction about what the industry is going to be. A network industry. Don't think about just one Hyperloop route from A to B, B to A. Think about, and we just heard about the stations, think about hubs, stations, nodes that would connect a series of Hyperloop routes together, and then you have a network industry. One thing I hate about my profession is our terminology. They have the word node. I dislike that in network economics, but that's what it is. Why is this important? Because if you have the hubs, stations, or nodes that go to different ones, it exponentially increases the number of origin-destination pairs. Let me give you an illustration. So, node, edge, they have these terms. Let's start off, okay? Forget these circles, these nodes. Just focus on these two, okay? This is me. These are airports, okay? This is me. I'm in Ithaca. This is Philadelphia. We have a connection to Philly. Suppose the Ithaca airport, just two nodes, Ithaca, Philly, Philly, Ithaca, Ithaca, Philly, right? It's kind of good, but it's a little limiting, right? So what would I pay for a seat on an airplane in Ithaca just if it only went to Philly? I'd pay some amount, right? But it kind of gets boring, right? Now suppose Philly has a connection to Orlando, Disney World. That's this. So Philly has a connection now to Orlando. What happened to the value of my seat, my willingness to pay for a seat in Ithaca Airport? It went up. Suppose Philly then has a connection to Houston. What happened? The price I'll pay for that seat went up. You get the point? So if I can get to Philly now, which I do often, I can get to DC, you know. So the value of the Ithaca Airport goes up enormously because I can get to these other hubs. That's network economics. That is not on the cost side. It is on the benefit or value side. Let's scoot back to the demand curve. Class, what did that do to the demand curve? Or up, depending on how you, it's the same.
We always shift left or
I
right.
know, that's what I tell my students. That's the way my brain works too. So Ben said, shifts to the right. So for any, what that means in common sense terms, any quantity of Hyperloop rides per week, people are willing to pay more. Conversely, depending on your brain, for any price, people will take more Hyperloop rides. What happened to your revenue? Up, right? So we need to think about a system, not because we love humanity, although we do, but because it'll generate more revenue. That orange rectangle will get bigger, right? You don't want a demand curve close to the origin. You want a demand curve that's way out there, where people get a lot of value. So then think about networks and the Hyperloop. Okay, so let's scoot back to this. I would hope this is why your stations are so important, why thinking about interconnectivity is so important, because that's where the value of the Hyperloop is going to be. Okay? Oh, and this just exponential. This is just like the number of nodes. This is what I forgot to put it in, but the willingness to pay would increase exponentially in the number of nodes on the network. All right? By the way, the single most popular class at Cornell University in Bailey Hall, which seats 1,200 students, is just called networks. Okay, so there's a lot taught by two economists. I want to just say, I'm not going to harangue you too much. Please do not confuse this with economies of scale. Network economies is on the demand side, the benefit side. Economies of scale is on the cost side. We can talk about that over coffee, but that's the idea that as the Hyperloop system gets bigger, the cost per unit declines, like a water system, where the price per gallon falls, the bigger the water system becomes, right? And we can, chew on whether that's going to be true for the Hyperloop. Please do not confuse those two things. This is a cost or supply side issue. The other thing is demand side. Okay, I did that. Next, advocate. I would like you to think about, as quickly as you can, this is a commodity. Now, some law professors hate this. There's certain things that I think should not be commodified in society, like bald eagles, right? I think there's some problems with treating a bald eagle as a commodity. I do not think that is true for the Hyperloop unit. I think airplane seats are a commodity. I think, whether it's United or Delta, I fly home, I don't care. As long as the seat's kind of the same, right? It's price. It's kind of a commodity. Same for kilowatt hour of electricity, therm and natural gas. Please think about the use of the Hyperloop as a commodity, because that's going to get the investors in. That's going to get the attention of the bankers, okay? Is that for me? Anyway, standardize the unit as quickly as possible. Think of it as a commodity. And this relates to this. I kind of like this language. I've studied utility economics for almost 30 years. Boy, I feel old. Think of it as a common carrier. Now, what those words have history in regulatory economics. It's you'll take all comers, right? Like I can't say Dan Egley over there. I hate that guy. He's got this container. It would fit in my Hyperloop. I'm not going to put his container in because it's Dane, right? No. If I'm a common carrier, unless Dane has hazardous materials in the container, I put it in my Hyperloop, right? So kind of this non-discriminatory notion. And it also feeds into the notion that you'll take all stuff up to the capacity of the Hyperloop. That gets you the revenue source. Again, that expands your demand curve and gets you that bigger revenue per unit of time. Again, we're getting back to utilities, trucking, railroads, et cetera, have been, the law changes over time, but you can think about those as common carriers, okay? Subject to safety constraints. Let me just say that I'm kind of proud to be working with two other economists, Peter Crampton at the University of Maryland, Axel Okenfels at the University of Cologne, on these innovative markets for, where we apply these principles. Peter is the economist who has helped utilities structure wholesale electricity markets. Basically, not retail, which is what we have here, but giant wholesale markets where the price of electricity changes every few seconds. So there's a spot price and a forward price. So if you're risk averse, you want to lock in a future price. You're a big user, like maybe UCLA. Then you say, okay, I can lock it in at a forward price. Even more interesting is the use of the radio spectrum. So the radio spectrum can be commodified, a certain power, certain megahertz. Your radio station gets to use that. Nobody can interfere with your signal. And we trade that right. And there's a price. So we've priced an unpriced resource. The third thing is Axel and Peter and I have a paper, I'll make a plug for it at the end because it's coming out next week, on road pricing. We believe every tiny bit of traffic congestion on Earth could be, it's due to the mispricing of roads. Could be solved if roads were properly priced. Okay, I'll just, obviously you get the feeling that I could go on for like 8 hours, and you're right, but I'm not. So I'll just stop with this slide, but this gets you into, I think, a really cool area of project delivery. And this is, managing the risk through these various contractual arrangements, okay? And one of the, things I like to write about are these public-private partnerships where you bundle project elements together in one big contract and bid that out at once. Design, construction, finance, operate, maintenance into one. And now I'll toss out another one. recycle. So let's think about building the Hyperloop now so that when it's time to dismantle it, it's a bit easier to, rejuvenate it. Cradle to cradle, not just cradle to grave, cradle to cradle, okay? And that would call for a new type of a PPP contract. So the gold standard right now is DBFOM, design, build, operate, finance, maintain, whatever the order is. Bundle that in a giant contract and bid it out, and that would be one way to deliver the Hyperloop. And my last slide is just, this gets you into a bunch of law that we don't have time for, which is the creation of SPVs. No company, I promise you, no construction company, no design company is going to want to be exposed to the risk of what we're talking about here. It's too risky. So they create sometimes they even call it a bankruptcy remote entity. No risk, push it away. Get our lawyers to create something. Usually the name of the entity actually is the name of the project. So it could be Northeast Hyperloop Company, just to pick one, right? And that's a legal entity. It can issue debt. It can sue and be sued. It can form contracts in its own name. It's like a legal person, and the parent companies invest in that. And that is the thing that bids, okay? It's not like Kiewit. It's not Parsons. It's not AECOM. It's not Bechtel. They would form this thing together with their bankers and lawyers, and it would be that special purpose vehicle that would bid on the Hyperloop project. This, I just think it's really cool. So, but anyway, I'll stop with that, and I think I'm still within my time. Let me just, Yep. I just want to say that before we do, I have to make the plug because I'm excited. Next week, this paper's coming out in Nature. Just a short comment, but dynamic road pricing is the only way to cut congestion. And Peter Crampton has this on his website. We've done a lot in Germany because of Axel. But if you just apply these ideas, just read it and say, just apply it to the Hyperloop, right? That's how I would recommend funding. Just let's do it right from the beginning, folks. Let's not go through this torture that we did with other utilities. All right. Jesse.
You concluded with public-private partnerships, and my understanding is that they aren't very much in use in the United States as opposed to maybe Europe.
Right.
What are the reasons for that, and how do we change that?
Okay, so I have two. I get that question a lot. Taxes and municipal debt. I've talked to infrastructure folks from like 50 countries. I get that a lot. I can't find another country where the same tax treatment, there's the same tax treatment of government-issued debt versus privately issued debt. So what it does, and this goes back to the battle with Franklin Roosevelt and this guy from New York City. Basically, if you're the city of Ithaca, you're the mayor of Ithaca, we need a new water system, costs tens of millions of dollars, you're going to issue tax-exempt municipal bonds to pay for it. And then the holders of those bonds are not taxed on the interest income. So guess who that appeals to? Wealthy U.S. investors. But it lowers your interest costs. We argue about between 150 and 200 basis points. So if you're kind of like remiss as the mayor of Ithaca if you don't take advantage of that. But what does that do to the private people? The private sector can't compete with that because their corporate debt is taxable. That's answer number one. Answer number two is just the delivery technique that the United States, again, the only country I know of, is called design, bid, build. And you bid out the design first. You say, yeah, we want that design. And then you bid out the construction of that design to guess who? The lowest cost construction company. So what do you get? The lowest cost construction. There's no life cycle parts of that. Most countries at least bundle design and construction together into one bid. And that was the new Tappan Zee, up where I am, the new Tappan Zee Bridge. Mayor or Governor Cuomo was saying, we did this innovative design build project. And I'm thinking, Governor, most of the rest of the world does that automatically. Put those two things together, and that's what we call traditional delivery, and it crowds out PPPs.
So are you saying for the tax-exempt bonds to do away with those all completely, the municipal tax-exempt, so that...
I would be shot. There's so much money in the tax-exempt muni bond. So that's why we have private activity bonds. And this PABs, right, is to extend the tax exemption to privately issued debt. And there's a big movement, and I'm included in this, others are, to extend, there was a cap on the Treasury, the US Treasury, limited private activity bonds because they lose the tax money. They're paying attention to the public fisc. But we want that extended to more types of infrastructure and to lift the caps. So there's a movement afoot, but it's a tough battle in DC. Yes, Thomas.
We're talking about a disruptive technology here, Hyperloop.
Yes.
Trying to make the case to private investors that they should invest in a disruptive technology. But I think when you look at the past about disruptive technologies, often they themselves are in competition with other disruptive technologies.
Absolutely.
And I mean, you look at the power industry, there's been a variety of different disruptions that have just kind of faded out because another disruptive technology came along and just wiped them out economically.
Sure. It's
And toll highways and lots of different things like that. I mean, how, in a sense, you need some sort of longer term constant vision that comes out of just the market sector. I mean, the market sector is pretty fickle.
Well, I mean, this goes back to one of my favorite economists, Schumpeter, an Austrian economist, coined the term creative destruction, right? And he said there's different types of competition. One is like Coke and Pepsi, right? And it's like knocking on a door versus a new technology, which is breaking down the door. What we are talking about is a new technology that will be disruptive beyond belief. Now, with Schumpeter, I don't believe government can pick winners and shouldn't, and losers. I think they have to do some of this, like with the right of way and what Pete Raham was talking about, but I really think you have to leave this up to the market to decide.
Nothing that, I mean, if you think the market's just going to do all this.
No, without, I mean, Pete was, the right of way. But that's, I believe, I mean, I wrote a book about public-private partnerships. So it's not just private, right? So the public and the private have to partner together to make this happen. I'm not going to minimize the importance of that.
Plus their retirements in the to say.
Oh, yeah, I remember, whoops.
They knew what all the energy markets were going to be. And it had nothing to do with the management. It was, they just misunderstood the market.
Yeah. So I'm not going to minimize the risks associated. I'm just going to offer financial and legal vehicles to manage the risk. That's all. Steve.
So the early days of air travel, you hear that prices were expensive. It was kind of an elitist thing. People dressed up to go flying. That's over on the far right side of your demand curve. High prices, relatively few people are using.
That's the left side of the demand curve. So I mean
Right, okay, sorry, left side.
Yeah, if you want to go back to.
If you look at the Star Ferry in Hong Kong, it costs a nickel to get a ride. It's probably subsidized, I don't know. But the other end of the demand curve.
Yeah.
Where do you think Hyperloop would fall within this, or can economists predict whether it's a high capacity, low price, or
Yeah. So let's, I love this, Steve. Let's scoot back to the demand curve. So basically this is something I've done for 300 years. Basically, suppose you lower the price of Hyperloop per ride, you get more quantity, but you'd have a lower price per ride. You'd lose area B, but you gain area C. Should you lower the price? Yes, if C is greater than B, right? So this is getting you to the revenue maximizing price, for the Hyperloop. But this depends critically on the slope of this curve, which it's the elasticity of demand. It's not the slope, it's the percentage change in price when you change quantity or vice versa. So when you and I have had the question, how will Hyperloop interact with other modes, right? Because we're not in the age of horse and buggy. We have these other modes. So what that does is it makes this demand curve more elastic, right? Because, and I'm thinking about customers, folks. Who might customers be? Amazon, parcel delivery, UPS, FedEx, United States Postal Service, big shippers shipping freight quickly through the Hyperloop that would sign up for big contracts, big capacity contracts for the use of the Hyperloop. Those are the customers I kind of have in mind. But Steve, they have other options now, right? So what that does is it makes this curve more elastic, and you can't price up the Hyperloop use as much as you could without the other modes. I kind of went off on a tangent, but I don't know if that answered you. I feel like I didn't answer your question.
Well, you have a prediction, because some of the companies are saying, hey, this is going to be such an inexpensive system to use. Can we count on that?
That gets us back to scale, I think. So which is the cost side of this. Let me just toss out HyperNet, right? The network of Hyperloops is the HyperNet. As the HyperNet gets bigger, as measured by quantity per unit of time, is the cost per unit going to go down? I think yes, but that's holding technology constant, right? But the other piece of this, I believe technology is going to, because of all you brilliant young people, is going to continue to get more efficient. Like we'll figure out problems with the Hyperloop, and we'll start to figure out cheaper ways of doing it. And it's going to bring the cost per parcel or per whatever lower. So, but the best answer, Steve, is no one knows. We have to try. Like we're standing here at Kitty Hawk in 1903 with the Wright brothers. There's no way you could predict Newark Airport 100 years down the road with the power of the jet engines and right? There's nobody could predict that. So we just have to go with it.
On that note,
Yeah.
I would like to conclude. We are running out of